Parashat Chukat and Balak this week, but let's talk about Chukat. Yesterday I went to a funeral, didn't know the man who passed away. But listening to the eulogies, got the sense that this was a very special individual, someone who'd really lived their life to the full, which enabled them, when they got a terrible diagnosis, to say, you know what, I've done good things. I've brought up a family, I've worked hard, I've made a difference. He was committed to his Judaism, learned the daily daf, which is incredible, for the last 6 years, not missing. And in fact, the family mentioned that when he was told to go to hospital, he wanted 3 things. Other than obviously the phone charger, he brought his Gemara. Incredible. And in that sense, the whole Chuzot Chukat HaTorah, this is the statue of the Torah, and the whole concept of death seem mind-boggling. Why should people like that pass away? People like that who make such a difference. And you begin to think, when you think about death, there are questions, but there are no answers. And that clashes with so much more of our life, where we assume that we know so many things. We know the answers, or we don't know we can find the answers. I can find out what's going on a random street anywhere in the world because there are websites dedicated to tapping into street cameras, and I can know and I can see in a way that we could never do before. So we live in this world where we have this opportunity, on the one hand, the opportunity to know a lot, and whatever I don't know, I can pretty much find out. It suggests that all the answers ought to be available. Understanding the why of life ought to be available. But then you get the other side of things, the questions you can't answer. And that begins to have an impact on how we think generally and how we think about our Judaism. Where does Judaism fit? Must it fit into the category of, I understand everything, when I understand it, I will do? Or does it necessarily have to fit into the category of, this is a command, this is the way things are, I don't understand why, I can't always make sense of it, but I do it anyway? And there are a large number of commentators on this week's parasha that take this concept of Zot Chukat Torah, this is a statue, this is a rule whose internal logic I can't understand, and say, actually, yes, it is written in relation to death. I think death is the why often. Why did this person have to get sick? Why did their life come to an end? Especially people whose lives are so impactful, who do so much good. And we can never get the answer to that. And perhaps it's suggesting to us that if we then extrapolate from this one rule, that's how we have to deal with our Judaism too. Yes, of course it's tempting to only do what we understand. What if the understanding comes only later on in life? What if we're not so quick to understand, and we spend our life doing the wrong thing, and only later on we realize, you know what, I should have devoted myself to doing something entirely different for the whole of my life, and that would have made my life so much more worthwhile. And of course it's difficult. Of course it's difficult to practice when we don't understand. And when we assume we understand, we inject our own personal biases into our practice, which means that we are almost sometimes limiting ourselves because our own perspective is limited by our life experience, by our age, by the way we tend to think about life in general. But if you can access the ability to practice, bow your head and say, I don't know. But there's a God who cares and loves. There's a God who wants the best for me. That's the God we believe in. If you believe in another God, of course, you're going to get to different results. But the God that the Torah wants us to believe in, the God of Jewish theology, is the God that loves us, the God that cares. And like a parent responding to a kid who's beginning to speak and wants to know why. Why is there a tree there? Why is that car blue? It's fun to make up answers and push the kid away and keep the kid quiet. But actually the questions are great. But ultimately, you need to know, the kid needs to know you're the parent and you love them. And you may not be able to answer every question, but the things you want them to do are out of love. So let's, this week, put aside our need to know, our need to answer every question. Of course, it's tempting. But the ability to practice and to say, I don't know, this is the will of Hashem, that's a whole new level. That's me committing in love to a God who's committed in love to us. We call that a relationship. Shabbat Shalom.